Thank you so much to Wild Grain for sponsoring today's video. Wintertime is definitely starting to set in where I live. We had our first snowfall this week and the kids were so excited to be playing outside, and the garden was just beautiful. It was all frosted over, and so I'm heading inside this week and I'm gonna be inside just cooking up a bunch of healthy different meals because my family's all been under the weather. We have this crazy cough, whatever, that's been going around, and so we've all been just under the weather, not feeling our best. And anytime we don't feel our greatest, I know I need to double down on good, nourishing food to make sure we're getting extra vitamins and minerals and liquids. So this morning I'm starting on one of my absolute favorite things to have for breakfast or even for snacks. It's also really great for busy school mornings when the kids are doing homeschool and I need something quick to give them so we can get going. And these are just little cheesy spinach and mushroom egg bites. So all you do is start by getting some butter in a skillet, and I'm gonna saute my mushrooms first and get those really nice and golden brown. You want to make sure that it kind of loses all that liquid and gets nice and golden around the edges. And so I'll just let those cook down and get a head start before I put in one bunch of fresh spinach that I just chopped up. Once those mushrooms are nice and golden brown, I add in all of that fresh spinach and it cooks down to just nothing. So I just season it a little bit with some salt, and that'll help that spinach wilt down even more. And then I'll pull it off of the pan and just leave it there to cool before we put it into the egg mixture. And for the egg mixture, it's really simple, and I always have my recipes at healthyelizabeth.com. That's my food blog, so if you want the written recipe, you can get it over there. But for the egg mixture, I'm using 7 eggs. You can get away with 6, but I think 7 is the perfect amount for a 12-well muffin tin. And then I'm doing a little bit of salt, and then I do 1 cup of heavy cream, or you can use half and half if you want it a little bit lighter. And then I do a mixture of cheddar cheese, like sharp white cheddar cheese. I love raw if I can get my hands on it. And then I also love adding in a little bit of Parmesan cheese because it has a different texture and a different flavor, and so I love combining different cheeses. Then I just get my 12-well muffin tin and I line it with unbleached parchment paper liners. These are just muffin liners, but I love that they're unbleached and parchment. I try to avoid foil or aluminum whenever I can, so these are a go-to for me. And then this recipe perfectly fills up the 12 wells, and I love topping it with a little bit of dried parsley because it just makes it look super beautiful and appetizing when they come out of the oven. So into the oven at 350, and I cook these for roughly 12 to 15 minutes, and they're amazing for having for meal prep or just keeping in the fridge, but I can easily double or triple this recipe and have a whole bunch to keep on hand. I always let them cool, and then I'll store them in a glass container just in the fridge. And I love this specific combination of spinach and mushrooms because the spinach is so high in iron and the mushrooms are full of fiber and protein, and it's just a really great source of more plant-based proteins. The next meal I wanted to share with you is one that is my favorite for this time of year, especially because it's warm and cozy, but it's still kind of like a salad, and it is a real go-to lunch. It is absolutely so delicious and so healthy and completely plant-based, so I love that. So I'm starting on a roasted winter vegetable quinoa salad, and you can serve it warm. I like to serve it warm, but then I'll put those leftovers in the fridge, and you can either eat it warm or cold, and it is so flavorful and so healthy. So what I'm taking is a butternut squash here that I've peeled, and now I'm just cubing them. You want to cut them into pretty small cubes because you want everything to roast up and get really nice and tender and just a little bit crispy around the edges. So I'm using a bigger sheet pan today. This is a half a sheet pan, and it's going to go in my big oven, not in my Breville Smart Oven. So we want plenty of room for all these vegetables to be able to crisp up and not just steam. So I recommend using the biggest sheet pan you have in your kitchen. So So I've got the butternut squash on there, and now I'm taking some Brussels sprouts and I'm trimming the ends off and quartering those. And then I'm also using a red bell pepper because I love anytime you roast red bell pepper, it just gets so sweet and almost has like a little bit of a smoky flavor. So you can definitely switch out the vegetables here, but these are some of my favorite ones. And then I'm also going to be using a little bit of golden beets. And beets are so good for you. They're also in season right now. You can grow them. They're super easy to grow, by the way. So if you have a garden, definitely try them. They're super, super good for you. You can even eat the beet greens, which are the tops of them, the leafy parts. But I actually ended up giving those to my chickens this week because I've been trying to feed them more and more since it's winter now, and there's not that much for them to kind of forage outside. So I always joke with my kids and say now I'm a chicken nutritionist because I try to feed my chickens really healthy. So I gave those beet tops to them, but you can definitely eat them or juice them. And I'm just going to take this red onion and do the same thing that I did with the red bell pepper and just cut it into nice big chunks. But then I like to break up the onion. So you don't want to leave it in these huge chunks where there are layers of onion together because they're not going to get very roasted and caramelized like we want. So I break them up so they're in chunky pieces, but then they're separated out, if that makes sense. And then I put all of that on my sheet pan. I'm drizzling it with a lot of oil. We want like 1/4 of a cup of oil because we want everything to be saturated in it so it can get nice and roasted and cooked down. And then I just sprinkle that with a bunch of my gray sea salt. Now, there's going to be maple syrup in the dressing that I'm going to dress this warm salad with, but a little trick I like to do is just drizzle about 1 or 2 tablespoons of maple syrup over my veggies before I roast them, because this helps to sweeten them up a little bit and help them caramelize. And if you want your kids to eat some roasted vegetables, a tiny bit of maple syrup is the key, I'm telling you. It makes them so yummy and gives them just a little bit of delicious flavor. And here I'm just showing you some of the scraps from those veggies that I put into my compost pile, so nothing goes to waste. Some of my best plants come out of my compost pile. I'll see big plants of basil and peppers growing out of that pile, so I know it's doing good stuff and I can use that later. So I'm just taking a few cloves of garlic here, and since it's going into the salad dressing, I couldn't find my garlic crusher, so I just sprinkled it with a little bit of chunky salt and used the back of my knife to kind of scrape it and mash it into a paste. This way it just melts into that dressing. So in the dressing for this quinoa and roasted veggie salad, all I'm doing is using some olive oil and apple cider vinegar, that garlic, maple syrup, just about a tablespoon, and about a teaspoon of dried oregano, which you could swap out for a different herb if you like basil or something like that, or just omit it altogether. And then just salt and pepper it and stir that up. It's just a really easy apple cider vinaigrette. And then I have that quinoa that I rinsed and drained, and then I cooked that in some vegetable broth. And I let it cool for a little bit, but it's still warm, and that's perfectly fine. And I'm just gonna add that into the bowl, and then after those roasted vegetables were all done and completely crispy and just delicious, I toss it all together with that little bit of dressing, and oh, it is so comforting. It's comfort in a bowl, and it's completely healthy. I love meals like this. It's full of protein, fat, and fiber, and you're getting so many different nutrients and antioxidants from all of those good veggies. I need to go ahead and feed my sourdough starter, and I haven't had a chance to make bread for dinner tonight, so I'm gonna feed that and I'll have it ready to go so I can hopefully put together some bread in the morning. I want to try 2 different recipes, so I'm gonna do that tomorrow. But in the meantime, since I haven't had time to make anything to go with our dinner tonight, I'm pulling these croissants out of the freezer. I love these. My whole family, we like go crazy for them. They're amazing, and you keep them in the freezer. They're from Wild Grain, who is a sponsor of today's video. So if you haven't heard me talk about Wild Grain before, they're the first ever bake from frozen sourdough subscription box. So they have sourdough bread, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas, which are really good. And they partner with small bakeries around the country, so it's really fresh, really good quality. On days when I haven't fed my sourdough starter and I certainly don't have bread going yet, I can just pull something from the freezer so we can have something good quality, much better than store-bought, on the table with dinner anytime. And it goes from freezer to table in 25 minutes or less. So it's perfect if you've run out of time and you're a busy mom like I am. They have a subscription box. It's customizable. They even have plant-based boxes, so there's tons of variety, and they're always adding new little limited edition things too. So it's really fun to just try out different products, and it's great if you're trying to feed a family. We even got this French butter by Wild Grain. So it's churned with French salt, which I use in my kitchen anyway. So I was beyond excited when butter showed up at my front door. This butter is really delicious. It's high quality butter, and I always have that stocked up in my kitchen. I cannot keep enough butter in my house, that is for sure. So if you want to check out Wild Grain too, be sure to use my link. I'll leave it down below in the description box. It's just wildgrain.com/healthyelizabeth30, and use my code at checkout, just healthyelizabeth30. It's gonna give you $30 off your first box, plus you'll get something free in every box. So if you try it out, let me know, and thanks again to Wild Grain for sponsoring this video. Today I'm going to be making one of our absolute favorite winter or just cozy season foods, and it's an easy one-pot broccoli cheddar soup. And it's really easy to throw together. You don't have to simmer it for very long, so you can put it together for lunch or a quick weeknight dinner. But before I get that going, I'm feeding my sourdough starter. And I always get questions about that, especially in the winter, because it can be a little bit harder to get your sourdough to be nice and active in a cold house. But what I've been doing lately is just feeding it smaller amounts, but doing a little more starter. And then I discard the rest of it into my discard jar that goes here in my fridge. So I have my starter that's been fed, and I've been doing about 20 grams of sourdough starter, and then 50 grams of water, 50 grams of unbleached organic flour, and that's keeping it really nice and active. And I'm just feeding it more often. That way it's staying really strong and vigorous and doesn't kind of start to fizzle out since it's cold. So that's just a little tip if you're needing to change up how you feed it for the winter time. So now I'm getting started on the soup, and what I love about this is you could either shred up carrots. My grater was actually in the dishwasher running, so I did it by hand. So I just finely diced them, but you could also use frozen carrots. So little carrots that come like in cubes that are frozen, you could easily use those for this soup to just make it really fast. And then I'm taking an onion and I'm finely dicing that, just a sweet onion, and I'll do my little lines down the onion like normal, but then I'll slice into it 2 times the opposite way. And that just gives you a little bit of a finer dice because we really want it to break down in this soup so we don't have big bites of onion. Next, I'm just using some broccoli florets that are frozen because whenever I don't have broccoli coming from the garden or farmer's market, I love just being able to keep frozen veggies in my freezer. It's super quick and super economical too. So I just have a big stock pot. I love this one. It's by Cuisinart, and it's stainless steel, but it has these little cute copper handles, and I just adore this pot. I bought it for canning because I needed a really large one, but now I use it for soups and different things all the time. And of course, today I enlisted a little helper. She was taking a break from her school, and so she wanted to help grate cheese. So they're helping me grate my cheese while I'm sauteing these veggies. So I have my butter in my pan, and then I just put in some carrots and the diced onion that we diced, and then I'm seasoning that with garlic powder and paprika and then salt, and you can do a little bit of pepper too if you want, but honestly this soup doesn't really need it because you want to be able to taste all the broccoli and the cheese. Just let those cook down and get really nice and soft. Then I'm adding in a bunch of broth. You can either use vegetable broth, but I really love the flavor of chicken broth in broccoli cheese soup. And then I'm adding in a bunch of half and half too, a lot. You can do a little or a lot. You can use heavy cream. You could use just milk, or you could even try doing coconut milk, but I haven't tried that before. So now you can make this either with a regular roux because there's plenty of butter in this recipe. So if you just want to sprinkle in flour, go ahead. But I actually wanted to make it gluten-free today. So I ended up using some organic cornstarch, and I just whisked that into my half and half, and that's going to thicken the soup. So it's super simple. That's like basically it. You just let that simmer and let those veggies and broccoli get nice and tender. Then I'll just hit it with a little bit of an immersion blender and then add in all that cheese. Let it simmer for a couple more minutes and it thickens up and it's ready to go. And it is so comforting and cozy. It's perfect to have just for lunch with a slice of bread and a little bit of salad or something, but it is so good. You can sneak in so many vegetables. You have onions, garlic, carrots, and of course tons of broccoli. So it's a great lunch or a great dinner and super easy to make. And let me tell you, the next day having it as leftovers is such a treat. my sourdough starter was nice and active. Yesterday I was able to put together some bread dough before I went to bed, and so I have those sitting out on the counter and they're ready to be worked with this morning. And then the kids have been playing outside in the snow, so I had to make them something warm to drink. We love all sorts of things like hot chocolates or little milk steamers with cinnamon and maple syrup. Anything warm they just love anytime they come in from playing outside in the cold, and it has been so cold here lately. So we're loving all the hot teas and elderberry syrup teas and just keeping warm as best we can. And one of the things I like to do is bake bread on those days because the big oven really starts to heat up the house. So all I'm doing here, this is my regular, just everyday crusty sourdough bread, and it is the best bread. If you're looking for a really nice, airy and chewy sourdough bread that's crusty, this is the go-to recipe. Trust me, I've tried a billion different recipes, and this one that's on my website is just absolutely phenomenal. So I just laminated that. That just means stretching it out really far so you can build structure in the bread, and then I'll just work that together. It's a nice hydrated loaf, so you want to touch it as minimally as possible, and then I'll just put that into my floured Banneton basket and let that rise for about 1.5 hours. Then I put it in the fridge to let it firm up a little bit before I turn it out, score it, and bake it off. But I also have been experimenting with rye bread. I got this recipe. It's so authentic. It was actually having to be translated to me in order to make it. So this is a very, very European style real dark rye bread. So it's sourdough. I fermented it overnight, and I'm going to make 2 sandwich bread loaves with it, and it turned out so amazing. I'm going to be putting that on my website really soon, so make sure you're on my email list. I have it linked down below in the description, but I'll be sure to email this recipe out because I know a lot of you have asked me for it over the past few months, but I didn't want to share it until I had it just right, and I had to enlist some help to get the recipe just right. I love this bread. So all I'm doing is, since it's a rye bread, it has a completely different texture, and you can't work with it too much because there's not very much gluten in this bread, which is great for people like me who sometimes have a slight gluten sensitivity. If you want something that's a little bit less hard to digest, this is a great recipe because it's rye. It only has a little bit of all-purpose flour, and then of course it's fermented overnight, and so that gluten breaks down even further. So I'm just stretching that out a little bit and shaping it, and then pressing that into an avocado oil grease loaf pan. Alright, tonight for dinner I'm making a cabbage and potato and white bean soup. So cabbage is in season. It loves this cold weather, just like the root vegetables like carrots. And of course I have onions this time of year, tons of onions, tons of potatoes. So this is a great soup to make, especially in the winter time especially if you grow those things, you have those all on hand, and I'm sure you're trying to find ways to use it up. So I love just simple soups like this. It's really inexpensive. You can make a ton of it. And when you take basic ingredients like this, it's really more about the method and how you season it. So I love just cooking this low and slow. If I'm gonna be at the house all day, I'll just put it on the stove and let it cook for as long as I want to, and just let everything get really nice and soft and tender. So I have a green cabbage, I've got a sweet onion or a yellow onion, either will work. And then you can use russet potatoes. I'm using some yellow potatoes. And then I have just a can of white beans. You can either do a cannellini or navy beans, and I've just drained those off and rinsed them a little bit. And then I'm gonna use a little bit of fresh thyme, but you can really throw in any fresh herbs you have. And then a whole bunch of vegetable broth. You're gonna want tons of broth for this soup. So for this cabbage and potato soup with white beans, all I do is I get out one of my Dutch ovens, and really I should have used my larger one, but I kind of forgot what I was doing this day. I'm not sure what I was doing with the smaller pot, but I'm doing a little bit of butter and avocado oil or olive oil in the bottom. You could even do all olive oil for this soup. I think because it's more of a kind of Mediterranean style soup, I think that it works better with olive oil than butter, to be honest. So I'm getting that sauteing in my Dutch oven with a little bit of onion, and I'm gonna let those really cook down and really soften and get golden. So I have a big green cabbage here, and I'm just coring it, and then I'm gonna cut all of the little pieces of cabbage into about 1/4 inch to 1 inch chunks, and then I'm gonna put that in there with the onion and stir that around, give it a little bit of salt to help it break down, and then I'm gonna put the lid on and let that wilt down and start to kind of really soften before we add the rest of our ingredients. Once that cabbage had really started to wilt down, I just had it over medium-low heat, so it took about 8 minutes, and then I just started adding the rest of the ingredients. So I'm doing some pepper, garlic, fresh thyme. We're gonna do those beans that we drained and rinsed, and then I'll add in all of those potatoes that I peeled and then just cubed up into nice chunks, and then I pour a whole bunch of vegetable broth over the top. You could definitely use chicken broth, that will be just as good. And then I also added in about 1/4 cup of tomato paste, and this just gives it such good richness, and it makes kind of a plain soup feel a little bit more special. And then I also like to end it a certain way and top it at the end with something interesting, so I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'm just gonna stir that in, and we're gonna let that cook on low for about 20 to 30 minutes. You can go even longer. You could probably cook it up to 40 or 45 minutes until those potatoes and cabbage are just really, really tender. This is one of those soups that's like a grandma style soup that you would just see a grandma simmering at their house all day long, and then you walk in and you just smell this delicious smell, and it's this kind of soup. It's perfect just to pair with a piece of my sourdough bread, so I'm gonna do that for dinner tonight. I just finish it off with a little dried parsley and a dollop of sour cream, but you could also use, which I love to do, a dollop of sauerkraut with it. It's so good. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and thanks again to Wild Grain for sponsoring.